With the help of historians Jackie Basile and Christine Walsh, the story of the California Gold Rush is brought alive again to enrich young adults on how important the gold rush was. After all, according to historians, the gold rush was arguably one of the most significant events to shape American history during the first half of the 19th century.
1848 was the year that changed the course of American history.
Before 1848, there was little motivation to go out west. The Donner Party disaster in 1847 led to the deaths of many innocent travelers who had put their lives in the hands of Lansford Hastings.
Hastings was an adventurous man, and he believed he found a faster, easier trail. He encouraged travelers to take it, even though he never actually traveled on it himself.
The Donner and Reed parties, along with other travelers, were stranded due to extreme weather conditions, and some of the people resorted to cannibalism out of desperation for survival.
The news of their horrific journey and cannibalistic behavior caused many settlers to be against the idea of manifest destiny. Manifest destiny was a popular belief during the 1800s, where many settlers felt it was their God-given right to move westward.
For years, California was a very unpopular place to live. It was not until the discovery of gold did people have the idea of fame, fortune, and a new life in California. This is what motivated people to move out west. Even the Chinese moved east to find a new life and possibly gold.
Why were so many people willing to make the dangerous journey west? It was because of the discovery of gold. Hopeful young men brought mining supplies on their voyage west because they wanted to become rich and live a life of luxury. The journey west, however, was not as easy as miners had hoped. The spread of disease, severe weather conditions, starvation, and exhaustion were just some of the factors that led to the deaths of many hopeful miners. Ironically, most people that became wealthy because of the gold rush were not miners who had discovered gold, but in fact merchants and business owners who sold food and other necessities.
One man by the name of James Marshall completely changed California and the rest of the world forever. His discovery of gold tremendously popularized California.
Before 1848, the year that he discovered gold, James Wilson Marshall was an ordinary carpenter from New Jersey. Yes, the Garden State. He worked for various woodworking companies in the region.
When Marshall commented on his discovery, he recalls, "It made my heart thump, for I was certain it was gold." Shocked by the discovery of gold, Sutter recorded the life-changing moment by writing in his journal. "I was sitting one afternoon, just after my siesta, writing a letter to a relation of mine at Lucerne, when I was interrupted by Mr. Marshall. From the unusual agitation in his manner, I imagined that something serious had occurred, and, as we involuntarily do in this part of the world, I at once went to see if my rifle was in its proper place. You should know that the mere appearance of Mr. Marshall at that moment in the fort was enough to surprise me. When he had recovered himself a little, he told me that, however great my surprise might be at his unexpected reappearance, it would be much greater when I heard the intelligence he had come to bring me. Intelligence," he added, "which is properly profited by, would put both of us in possession of unheard of wealth. Millions and millions of dollars, in fact." This at once decided him. He mounted his horse and rode down to me as fast as it would carry him with the news. At the conclusion of Mr. Marshall's account, and when I had convinced myself from the specimens he had brought with me that it was not exaggerated, I felt as much excited as himself. I eagerly inquired if he had shown the gold to the workpeople at the mill, and was glad to hear that he had not spoken to a single person about it.
As news of the gold discovery began to spread, people were beginning to travel to California. However, it was not until President James K. Polk publicly spoke about the gold rush that California's population dramatically increased.
The accounts of abundance of gold are of such an extraordinary character as would scarcely command belief were they not corroborated by the authentic reports of officers in the public service.
California was acquired by the United States through the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo.
People in California were shocked, but excited about the gold discovery. To create more gossip and publicity, a storekeeper, Sam Brennan, walked through his town showing a vial of gold that he supposedly got from Sutter's Creek.
On March 15th, a newspaper, The Californian, published the first story of Marshall's find and stated, "The whole country, from San Francisco to Los Angeles, resounds with the sordid cry of 'Gold! Gold! Gold! While the field is left half planted, the house half built, and everything neglected but the manufacture of picks and shovels.
Ironically, the first two people to find gold, James Marshall and John Sutter, faced failure towards the end of their lives. Because of all the publicity, miners started appearing on John Sutter's farm to find their own gold, and at the same time, most of John Sutter's workers completely abandoned him so that they could become rich. John Sutter was very mad about this because he was losing money and his property was being destroyed.
Sutter often spoke about his failures, stating how by the sudden discovery of gold, his plans were all destroyed.
Had I succeeded for a few years before the gold was discovered, I would have been the richest citizen on the Pacific shore. But it had to be different. Instead of being rich, I am ruined.
John Sutter felt that he had been better off and more successful if gold had not been discovered. When the gold was found, the news spread quickly, and Sutter's property was overrun by hopeful perspectives.
Soon as the secret was out, my laborers began to leave me, in small parties first, but then all left, from the clerk to the cook, and I was in great distress. What a great misfortune this sudden discovery of gold for me! It has just broken up and ruined my hard, restless, and industrious labors, connected with many dangers of life, as I had many narrow escapes before I became properly established. Due to land commission procedures that America used when they obtained California, Sutter was not given his property, which was meant to be given to him by the Mexican government right away. Due to the fact that Sutter wanted his land immediately, he went to the Supreme Court, hoping that they would rule the case in his favor. Unfortunately, the Supreme Court ruled that certain places of the land title that he had were void. Sutter tried to get his money and land back, but was unsuccessful.
Washington, D.C. He was so close to a life of happiness and wealth, but unfortunately that dream died with the discovery of gold. If the gold had never been discovered, he would have had a happy life alone on his farm. Unfortunately, his farm was taken over by greedy miners hoping to find riches.
Eventually, Marshall left the search for gold and found work as a blacksmith in California. His job as a blacksmith was a failure, and his attempt to open a vineyard also failed as well. Desperate for money, James Wilson Marshall was a partner in a gold mine in California. However, the gold mine was not profitable and caused Marshall to lose money. As a result, Marshall died as a poor man in 1885. Marshall was not a failure, however, for the majority of his life. Without his land and his worker, John Sutter, gold might not have been found until decades later. Although he went through financial and business problems, Marshall was an influential person in the California gold rush. After all, the discovery of gold on Marshall's property is what caused the gold rush initially.
Because of the discovery of gold, California became the most popular place to go in the mid to late 1840s. Because of this, California's population grew to 86,000 in just 2 years.
By the 1840s, California was changed completely for the better and worse.
It has been unknown for many years where gold comes from, until scientists discovered that gold comes from supernova explosions. Today it is used to make jewelry, art, and coins. In modern times, as well as long ago, gold is found by mining and panning for gold in rivers and streams. Panning for gold is a method of sifting through sediments and rocks in rivers to find gold.
During the 1800s, people were called Argonauts because it only brought few people wealth and it was free to take from the earth.
The first few people who came to California found nuggets of gold, which made them instantly rich. These lucky few and the thousands of other people who came to California were said to have gold fever as their searches for the precious stone intensified. These Argonauts would do practically anything to find gold, and possibly their very own dreams.
By 1852, the attraction of gold led settlers to leave their families and friends so that they could try their luck at finding their own fortunes. $81 million worth of gold was found by Californians, not by miners who were said to have had the wrong equipment. The locations that miners were focusing on to look for gold did not have an abundance of gold. Besides there not being an abundance of gold, the miners did not have the proper tools and equipment to find the precious mineral. In 1849, citizens of the United States were encouraging settlements in the West. Citizens wanted a chance at a new life as well as gaining acres of land cheaply instead of living in overpopulated cities. The miners of 1849 were people who left their homes in order to gain financial capital and thought that they could easily make a lot of money. However, working for long hours for a puny chance of finding gold and their difficult journey was not what the hopeful miners had thought they would be facing. People who moved to California after Marshall's discovery of gold were called the 49ers because they all came to California in 1849. Unfortunately, these 49ers did not realize how hard the work would be.
Due to these findings, miners rarely found enough gold to satisfy their financial needs, which led them to give up their search on gold, even though they had traveled such a far distance. Along with the 49ers, miners had difficult lives. Typical miners worked for 12 to 16 hours a day, 6 days a week excluding Sundays.
Sacramento, California was one of the largest boom towns. Boom towns were towns that arose due to economic or political development. The boom towns flourished during the California gold rush as a result of the need of supplies and food for the miners.
Shopkeepers also made a lot of money by charging high prices for necessary supplies. They often made more money off of selling tools than the miners did mining for gold. In fact, during the gold rush, flour was $800 a barrel, and a standard shovel was $100 in California. If the discovery of gold did not occur, flour would normally cost $18 a barrel. Some who were lucky enough to find gold thought that these prices were affordable. For those who had trouble finding gold, these prices can easily be seen as a nightmare.
At this time, anybody that had a digging tool could become a miner. If a person found any type of gold, they would be making a lot of money. On a regular day, a person who found gold would make about $15 or $16 a day. A farmer, on the other hand, would only make about $1 a day. From the beginning, people realized that it would be much easier and more productive to work in groups rather than by themselves. Sooner or later, these groups turned into companies and corporations.
As companies began to become more common and beneficial, they started offering living spaces to their employees, since the majority of the miners that went to California were young, single men.
Tents and cabins were the usual living quarters for miners. Men would take turns cooking, cleaning, and taking trips to get food and mail.
Since miners were poor, the undesirable camps and towns were hastily built due to the huge population increase. Examples of the names of these camps were Poverty Hill, You Bet, Chucklehead, and Get Up and Get.
Historian and author Kenneth Davis describes the hard lives of miners in his book, saying that miners spent their days squatting near the edge of rivers, shoveling and picking a rock, and shaking their heavy pans to clear the gold specks from the dirt. They worked during horrible weather, especially hard wind and rain.
The clothing that miners wore were very flimsy. They needed clothing that would keep them protected and that would be long-lasting. Levi Strauss invented denim jeans to fulfill the needs of miners. Although regular pants were made out of sturdy fabric, they were not comfortable and were not long-lasting. The miners needed something that was more durable than their regular set of pants that were able to take on the effects of moisture. Strauss ended up making his own fortune producing jeans rather than doing what he came to do, which was trying to find gold.
Besides performing strenuous work for a reward that may never come, miners were able to find ways to amuse themselves. After all, miners have very difficult lives out in the field and needed some form of relaxation and amusement. Whenever they had free time, miners would go to the local saloons and drink and gamble. Miners would also go to the theater to see small plays and shows be performed.
A 20-year-old from Pennsylvania, Enos Chrisman, wrote about his Sundays, which was the only free day miners had, by saying, "Sunday is a great day here. In the morning we have public auctions, in the afternoon the bullfight and the circus, and in the evening Dr. Collier's troupe of model artists, together with numerous fandango rooms, dance houses, and scores of gambling halls. While I am writing, my friends at home perhaps are at church. Here the fife and drum are calling the people to the circus."
People on a canvas for shade become a gambling center. In San Francisco, famous gambling houses were set up, such as the Parker House, the Empire, the El Dorado, and the Bella Union. In fact, there are more than 500 bars and 1,000 gambling places in San Francisco alone. There are always fights and high stakes when gambling. One miner wrote, "A few pistol shots would cause a temporary melee, but the gamblers would soon return to their cards." In many poker games, there would be either gold or a lot of money in the pot. It wouldn't take long for a person to take out their gun to make sure that they got the price that they rightfully deserved.
Gambling was one of the many activities that miners were involved in. In fact, since the men were away from their family and friends, the miners were allowed to do whatever they wanted, and often were involved in dangerous but exciting activities. A missionary, Israel Lord, who was out in California, described the miners' behavior by saying, "The utter recklessness, the perfect abandon with which they drink, gamble, and swear is altogether astounding. You know nothing about it in the States. Never did, never will, I trust."
Gambling and drinking were not only the activities that miners enjoyed. Another interesting activity that miners did was going to see live shows. The Eagle Theater in Sacramento opened at the end of 1849, and miners paid about $5 each to watch the first English spoken play in California. The stage at the Eagle Theater was made out of packing crates. The theater itself sat about 400 people.
The shows involved actresses, which made men eager to see shows, since they rarely saw women. Due to a flooding issue, the Eagle Theater was only open for 2.5 months, but soon other theaters were developed. In fact, by the 1850s, over 1,000 written works were being shown, including plays by William Shakespeare.
During this time, the female population went from 3% to almost 19% in 1860. This caused the total female population in California to go up to 9,000. In mining areas, the female population was less than 2%. However, in California, females caused men to act more civilized instead of reckless and crazy.
California during this time found themselves in a very bad situation. Women were not treated very well by the men. They could either go and look for gold like the men, or go into prostitution. Unfortunately, many were raped due to the lack of females that were in the area. In fact, according to one story, a miner walked 16 miles just to see a woman.
Miners had a lot of free time on their hands because they were away from home. Having all of this free time would often cause violence and destruction. For instance, during a period of 18 months, San Francisco was burnt down 6 times. There were 1,000 murders committed in San Francisco during the 1850s, yet strangely, there was only one conviction. This one conviction out of 1,000 murders shows that the law was still very primitive when it came to investigating crimes, and especially in such conditions.
Miners would kill American Indians for fun because the Americans felt that the Indians had no right to be there. Miners also wanted to restrict the number of immigrants coming to America so that they can get the most gold that they could without any more competition.
Not all miners were good people, and due to their boredom and frustration over not finding enough gold, they committed violent acts and formed rebellions. Miners drove Mexicans from the mines, and if they did not go, they yelled death threats. Since the government could not keep the crimes from occurring, merchants formed committees who tried to rule by the lynch law and established courts. The lynch law was a law that stated the accused person or persons be punished, usually by death, without any legal process or authority. The decision of punishment was usually in mobs of angry men who were unable to think intelligently due to their greed.
The news of the gold rush had not only spread around the United States, but around the world as well. Only half of the travelers that came to California were Americans, while the remainder of the people who came were from Britain, Australia, Germany, France, Latin America, and China.
People from Asia came in at the San Francisco port and immediately made their way to Sutter's Farm. These immigrants had to deal with exhaustion, cholera, starvation, and exhaustion on their voyage. They also had to deal with shipwrecks and possible overcrowdedness.
A journey to California took about 6 to 9 months and was very dangerous. It's estimated that 32,000 immigrants made the expedition overland in 1849, and 44,000 more people came to California in 1850.
The temptation to discover gold in California was quickly gone after the immigrants realized how difficult the journey was. Personal items, mining equipment, and other items were discarded along the voyage for a better chance of survival. With these important items gone, foreigners were faced with an even bigger challenge of having to buy supplies with the little money they needed to buy food and water.
People who originated from different countries and went to California traveled by boats. The journey by sea lasted about 4 to 8 months. From April 1859 to January 1850, approximately 40,000 people arrived in San Francisco by boat alone.
Traveling to California was a dangerous journey for all settlers. Some Americans who decided to make the journey to California died along the way or gave up and went back to their homes. Some Americans decided to take alternate routes to get to California faster. Instead of traveling on the Oregon Trail and then going on to the California Trail, some attempted to take a shortcut across the Nevada desert. As a result of the weather and barren land for hundreds of miles, people died taking this new route.
The Chinese people were one of the main groups of immigrants that came to California. When the news of the gold rush reached China in 1848, thousands of Chinese men left their homes and went on boats to what they called the Gold Mountain, which is another name for California.
By 1852, 25,000 Chinese had arrived in California. While they were in California, many Chinese had to work to pay off the cost for them to travel to America, which was anywhere from $30 to $125. To pay off the large debt, many immigrants would work in saloons, in mining company, or on the Transcontinental Railroad.
Some Chinese women had to become prostitutes to pay for their trip to California. One of the prostitutes was Madame Atoy, who came to San Francisco in 1850 and quickly became popular with the men. She got her freedom, opened mysterious and dangerous stores in the San Francisco area, and returned to China wealthy.
Even though some foreigners became rich, they were still discriminated against. In fact, the Americans felt threatened by the foreigners, including the Mexican people. The miners began issuing taxes on the foreigners in hopes that they would leave the area.
The Chinese people suffered severe discrimination and had to pay a special tax to mine golds. This tax forced them to work in laundry, retail, and heavy construction. They helped build the Transcontinental Railroad, which extended through Sacramento. By working on the Transcontinental Railroad, the Chinese had a steady paycheck, even though it wasn't as large as they hoped for.
The Transcontinental Railroad was a national project that enlisted the help of practically anyone. The railroad was used to transport food and supplies to western lands so that the West would be connected to the rest of the world. Besides mining for gold, immigrants who were discriminated against began to work on the railroad. Working on the railroad was not easier than working in the mines. Most people of Chinese and Mexican descent worked on the railroad. Immigrants were hired to work on the railroad because they worked for less than Americans would.
When the population reached over 60,000 people, California applied for statehood in 1849. Before it applied for statehood, it was run by a military government. Between 1849 and 1850, there were significant debates over whether or not California should be a free or slave state.
Due to California gold rush and its popularity, California was in the process of becoming a state. Debates were occurring over what type of state it should be, since making California a slave state would affect the competition for finding gold. It would also affect the representation in government. At this time, North and South had been fighting over who had more power in the government. New laws were laid out so that California would become a free state, since many Californians wanted their state to become a free state. The argument over California being a free or slave state was settled in the Compromise of 1850. The United States gained the southern portion of California through the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo in 1848.
The United States began using border control. It was put in place to prevent Chinese immigrants from coming into the United States through Mexico. The crackdown on immigrants was due to the high influx of illegal Chinese immigrants. Officers who were at the border were mainly on horses. The officers would not work unless there was a problem, which left many opportunities for the Chinese to come into the United States.
If James Marshall had never found gold, California may have taken a much longer time to become a state. Even though James Marshall was the one to find the gold on John Sutter's farm, neither of these two men ever received the recognition they deserved. Because of them, over the next few years, $300 million worth of gold was found. Sutter's farm was completely destroyed by settlers and immigrants. The miners completely ruined most of the land surrounding the farm just so they could become wealthy. What they did not know was that most of them would be unsuccessful with their ventures.
When people didn't find any gold or only found small amounts of it, the towns that were made for miners were abandoned. In fact, most of the gold that was found in the West was located in the mountainside of the Sierra Nevada.
As a result of not being able to find any more gold, the people who stayed in California became farmers, store owners, or workers in the cities. Gold and silver discoveries were found in other states, and the gold rush continued since people still wanted to become rich. In the 1850s, many went to Colorado, and in the 1860s, people traveled to Nevada, Montana, and Idaho.
Most of the gold found in those states was not discovered by miners because they did not have enough money or equipment in order to obtain the gold. By the 1860s, mostly all of the western lands were developed, and eventually the land became states.
When the land became states, they began to develop into cities and towns. The area around San Francisco remained heavily populated and transformed into the city it is today.
Now, in the 21st century, California is the home to many movie stars, and now boasts Disneyland, which is a very popular vacation destination with families. In Northern California, there is the Petrified Forest, a state park home to unimaginably tall redwood trees that are hundreds of years old. Due in part to the California Gold Rush, California has now developed into a very glamorous state that has and will be adored for a very long time.